He was known as the Intimidator, a force of nature on the racetrack. But on one bright, cloudless afternoon, February 18, 2001, Dale Earnhardt's final race ended with a crash so sudden, so deceptively minor, it shook the soul of NASCAR. On the surface, it looked like a routine tap against the wall. But inside that black no, three-car, something irreversible had just taken place. This isn't just the story of a crash, it's the terrifying truth NASCAR never saw coming. At Daytona International Speedway, the energy was electric. Nearly 200,000 fans filled the stands for the legendary Daytona 500, the crown jewel of NASCAR. The engines thundered, the cars roared past in a blur, and the stakes were sky high. This wasn't just a race. It was a war of speed, strategy, and sheer will. Dale Earnhardt as Sr. The fearless seven-time champion wasn't chasing the win that day. He was defending it for his team. Leading the pack were Michael Waltrip in car No. 15 and Earnhardt's own son, Dale Jr. in car No. 8. As the final lap approached, Earnhardt. But instead of gunning for first, he played guardian, blocking the competition and shielding his two drivers. The tension crackled as the field hurtled into the last turn. Sterling Marlin crept in behind him. Ken Schreider edged close. In an instant, everything changed. Earnhardt's car twitched violently, slid down low, then whipped back across the track. Schreider was right there. The two collided with bone-rattling force at nearly 160 mph. Both cars slammed into the outside wall. Gasps erupted from the crowd. The smoke cleared. Schreider stumbled from his wreck and ran to Earnhardt's window. He looked inside and froze. No movement, no sound, just silence. He waved desperately for help. Something was terribly wrong. At nearly 160 miles per hour, even the slightest error can prove fatal. But this wasn't an error. It was a perfect storm. Dale Earnhardt's car didn't drift. It snapped. The rear end broke loose, sending the no, three machines skidding low on the banking. Then, with terrifying speed, it whipped back up into the path of oncoming cars. Ken Schreider's yellow car was already there. He had no time to react. The two vehicles collided with a deafening crunch, an explosion of force and metal that sent both machines rocketing toward the outer wall. In that moment, the sound of the crash silenced an entire state. Earnhardt's car struck the wall at a brutal angle, between 55 and 60 degrees, right at the front end. At nearly 157 miles per hour, it was the kind of impact that even veteran fans instinctively feared. The hood crumpled, the front of the car collapsed like paper. Sparks flew, smoke rose. Debris sprayed across the track. Schreider's car bounced and rolled to a stop. He climbed out, clearly rattled, but conscious. Then he turned to the no. 3. What he did next told the world everything. He sprinted to Earnhardt's window, peered inside, and froze. There was no movement. He called Dale's name. Nothing. His face turned ashen. He turned away and began waving with wild urgency, his arms slicing the air, a clear, desperate signal for help. Track officials and emergency crews reached the scene within seconds. They surrounded the wreck, tried to open the door. Stuck. Rescue tools were brought in. Sheets went up to block cameras. A hush fell over the crowd. Something was terribly wrong. On pit road, Waltrip's victory celebration faded into silence. Dale Jr. was pulled aside. The pit crew stopped cheering. The toughest man in racing wasn't moving. And suddenly, victory meant nothing at all, as emergency crews surrounded the mangled wreck of Dale Earnhardt's car. The grandstands fell into eerie silence. The No. 3 Chevrolet was in ruins, the hood torn off, windshield spider-webbed, the front end crumpled like paper. But it wasn't the damage alone that shook people. It was the stillness. Dale wasn't moving. Rescue teams wasted no time. They rushed in with tools, trying to pry the door open. It was jammed tight from the impact. Hydraulic cutters were deployed. Metal groaned as they sliced through the wreck. Inside, paramedics leaned in. No motion, No response. Dale Earnhardt lay lifeless in his seat. They gently lifted him out and onto a stretcher. Not a sound came from the stands. Fans watched, hands over mouths, eyes wide. The ambulance's lights flicked on, but there was no urgency in the way it pulled away. Just a quiet, dreadful pace toward Halifax Medical Center. Just minutes from the track. Back on pit road, confusion was turning into fear. Michael Waltrip had just claimed his first NASCAR Cup Series victory. Dale Jr. had crossed the finish line right behind him. There should have been celebration. Something was deeply wrong. At the hospital, doctors tried everything: CPR, adrenaline, defibrillators, but there was no pulse. The trauma to Earnhardt's head and neck was beyond help. The crash hadn't just stopped a car, it had stopped a life. When the announcement came, it struck like a thunderclap. Dale Earnhardt, the Intimidator, was gone. Broadcasters fought back tears. Crew members stood frozen. Fans openly sobbed in the stands and at home. The man who had defined toughness, who had walked away from wrecks countless times before, had been taken in the blink of an eye. It wasn't just a tragedy. It was the moment NASCAR lost its soul. From the outside, it looked like a crashed Dale Earnhardt should have walked away from. NASCAR had seen worse: cars flipping through the air, bursts of fire, wheels flying off. But this was different. What looked survivable turned fatal in milliseconds, and what happened inside that car would haunt the sport for decades. When Earnhardt's car slammed the wall, the violence wasn't all visible. The hood pins ripped free, sending the hood flapping violently against the windshield over and over like a thunderous drumbeat. The nose of the car folded in on itself. Sparks burst from the impact. The machine finally slid to a stop on the infield grass, but the real damage had already been done. Inside, the cockpit had become a chamber of lethal physics. Paramedics reached Earnhardt fast, but it was too late. His body had absorbed the full energy of the crash. There was no room for escape, no buffer left. The autopsy confirmed a horrifying truth. Earnhardt had suffered a basilar skull fracture, break at the base of the skull caused by an extreme, sudden jolt. It's an injury that kills almost instantly, the kind of blow that no amount of toughness could ever endure. But the question remained: why did this crash become fatal when so many others didn't? The answer started with the seatbelt. Though Earnhardt was buckled in, the belt didn't perform properly. It didn't tear, but it failed in a hidden, deadly way. Experts called it a dump, where the belt shifted or gave way under pressure. In that fraction of a second, his body surged forward. His shoulders moved, but his head didn't. That violent whiplash, that sudden stop, it delivered the fatal blow. In a blink, Dale Earnhardt, a man who had beaten the odds again and again, was gone. Not from recklessness, but from a system not yet ready to protect its greatest hero. In 2001, NASCAR was a world built on speed, instinct, and legacy. But just beneath the roar of engines and the flash of fame, a silent debate had been growing, one that would come to define the future of the sport. At the center of it all was a device few wanted, but many needed: the Hans device. Short for head and neck support, the Hans device was designed to do one thing: stop a driver's head from snapping forward in a violent crash. It linked the helmet to the shoulders, ensuring the head and torso moved together. In tests, it reduced the risk of a fatal basilar skull fracture. The technology was there, it was proven, but in 2001, most drivers weren't wearing it. Many thought it was uncomfortable. Some said it limited their ability to turn their heads or check. Others, including Dale Earnhardt, felt it interfered with their driving feel, an unwelcome barrier between them and the car. To many, it was a luxury, not a necessity. That belief ended at Daytona. As investigators analyzed the crash, one glaring absence stood out: Dale had not been wearing a Hans device. The conclusion wasn't certain, but it was damning. Had he worn it, there was a real chance he might have survived. In the aftermath, something remarkable happened. The resistance vanished. Drivers who had once mocked the Hans device now refused to race without it. Pit crews re-examined every safety harness. Teams demanded changes, and NASCAR listened. Within months, head and neck restraints were no longer optional. They were mandatory. It was one of the fastest, most sweeping safety mandates in the sport's history. Dale Earnhardt's loss exposed a fatal blind spot, but his legacy lit the path forward. Sometimes it takes a tragedy to wake a sleeping giant. Dale Earnhardt's death didn't just break hearts. It shattered NASCAR tolerance for avoidable danger. What had once been accepted as part of the sport suddenly became unthinkable. This wasn't just a tragedy, it was a turning point. NASCAR responded with urgency. An internal investigation began immediately, analyzing every detail of the crash. Engineers studied race footage, scoured the wreckage, and pored over telemetry data from Earnhardt's car. Every second of input, steering, braking, impact speed, was broken down like never before. The conclusion was unavoidable. The cars were not safe enough, not for drivers, not for legends. One of the first reforms was critical. The Hans device became mandatory. No more personal choice, no more debate. It was required gear. Then came seatbelt reforms. Belts were redesigned, mounting standards were revised, and installations were standardized to prevent the kind of catastrophic failure that contributed to Earnhardt's fatal injuries. But one change stood out above the rest. Unlike concrete, it absorbed impact. Made from steel and foam, it compressed on contact, dramatically reducing the energy that reached the driver. Tracks nationwide began installing them at record pace. Daytona, Talladega, Charlotte, others followed. And NASCAR wasn't the only one watching. The ripple effect swept across the globe. IndyCar, Formula One, sports car series. Even local tracks, everywhere, motorsports began to reevaluate what they had long ignored. Safety became priority number one in crash tests, in car design, in driver education. Change took hold. All of it, every new device, every protocol, every saved life could be traced back to one moment. Dale Earnhardt's final lap didn't just end a race. It began a revolution. And in every driver who walks away from a crash today, his legacy is still saving lives. In the days after Dale Earnhardt's death, NASCAR entered a state of mourning. Tributes poured in from every corner of the country. Flowers, letters, and hand-painted signs blanketed the fences of Daytona. A hole left behind on every track. But while the racing world was grieving, the Earnhardt family faced something far more personal and painful. Under Florida law at the time, autopsy records, including photographs, were considered public documents. That meant anyone, including media outlets, could legally request them, and some did. Several newspapers filed requests to obtain Dale's autopsy images. They claimed it was about transparency. But to the family, it felt like an unforgivable intrusion. Teresa Earnhardt, Dale's widow, acted quickly and fiercely. She wasn't just a wife. She was a protector of legacy. Alongside Dale Jr. and their loved ones, she fought to keep those images private. It wasn't about hiding anything. It was about dignity, about keeping a hero's final moments sacred. The legal battle exploded into national headlines. News outlets argued First Amendment rights. The Earnhardts argued humanity and respect. The courtroom became a battleground between law and compassion. Across the country, the public rallied behind the family. Fans, fellow drivers, and lawmakers agreed there had to be a line. And then a breakthrough. The Florida legislature passed the Earnhardt Family Protection Act. It blocked public access to autopsy photos unless approved by a judge. That victory didn't just protect Dale's memory, it inspired similar laws in other states. Even in death, Dale Earnhardt was still changing the world. Family's fight was more than legal. It was emotional, fierce, loving, and it proved that Dale's legacy wasn't just about racing. It was about honor, courage, and standing up for what's right. Dale Earnhardt's final race ended on turn 4 at Daytona. But his story didn't stop there. It echoes still in the thunder of engines, the cheers of fans, and the quiet moments when drivers strap in safer than ever before. He was more than a driver. He was the heart of NASCAR, a man of grit, fire, and incredible focus. Born into a racing family, he left school early to chase speed. He built his legacy not with wealth or shortcuts, but with sheer will. Black No. 3 wasn't just a car, it was a signal, a warning, a legend in motion. When he died, the world lost a racer, but his family lost a father. His crew lost a leader, and the sport lost its fiercest protector. Yet from that heartbreak came something extraordinary. The Hans device became mandatory. Seatbelt designs were overhauled. Safer barriers lined every major track. New crash data systems were installed. Helmets improved. Racing transformed not just because it had to, but because one man's loss made sure it never happened again. Dale's legacy didn't fade with time. It expanded. He became a case study in how tragedy can bring reform. His story is taught in classrooms, memorialized in documentaries, and whispered in garages by mechanics who never met him but owe him everything. For Dale Jr., the pain became purpose. Not by carrying his values forward, racing hard, living boldly, giving back. Even fans too young to remember that day know the name. They wear the shirts, visit the tributes, feel the weight of what was lost and what was gained. Because Dale Earnhardt didn't just race to win. He raced to protect, to lead, to define an era. And in the end, he gave the sport more than victories. He gave it a future.